For this project, I'm going to attempt to transform these jeans into a patchwork skirt using this as my inspiration. So here we go. First, cut off the legs. My plan is to have the skirt hit above the knee, but I'm giving myself extra since I don't know exactly how this will end up. Open the seams of the legs and the hem by pulling on the threads using a seam ripper or whatever method you prefer. I also used the waistband, so I removed that as well. The waistband should be 2.5 inches wider than your waist. If your jeans are too small, you can create a waistband from a strip of denim 4 inches wide and the length of your waist circumference plus 2.5 inches. Next, we're going to lay out the pieces. I used an old skirt to get an idea for the shape, but if you don't have a skirt, you can use a pattern for a quarter circle skirt as a guide. To make the pattern, you'll need to calculate two measurements, the waist radius and the skirt length radius. The waist radius is your waist circumference plus 2 inches divided by 1.57, and the skirt length radius is the waist radius plus the length of the skirt plus 1/2 inch for seam allowance plus the hem allowance. For reference, the length of my skirt is 16.5 inches plus 1/2 inch seam allowance and no hem allowance because I'm leaving the edges raw. To create the pattern, use a large piece of paper and mark the distance of the waist radius along the top edge, then draw a quarter circle and repeat with the measurement for the skirt length radius. Now you can use this pattern to build your skirt. I wanted to keep the distressed edges of the light jeans, so I planned my design around them. I cut 3 light denim pieces to the same size. Once I had my main pieces, I filled in the remaining pieces with the fabric from the dark jeans. Then I marked them with a piece of soap, evened the lines up a bit, added 1/2 inch seam allowance, and cut out the sections. For the front button placket, I needed 2 strips 2.5 inches wide by the length of the skirt, which for me was 17 inches. But since I didn't have enough fabric left over, I had to piece 2 sections together for each placket. To keep the distressed look, I'm going to sew these 2 seams using the same technique as on the original jeans, but if you don't want that look, you can use a regular seam. On the original jeans, the seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, so I had to make sure the seam allowance is the same on the adjoining piece. I wanted the seams to interlock, so I ironed the light denim seam allowance under and the dark denim seam allowance up, then interconnected the two and pinned them in place. Then I top stitched the seams together using the original seam line as my guide and sewed along the second seam line as well. Repeat on all panels where you want to preserve the original seam. This is what the seam looks like on the back. For the other seams on the skirt, I'm going to use regular seams. So I'll sew the panels together with the right sides facing each other. Since I want to preserve the fade mark, I'm going to sew near the original seam line. Finish the raw edges with a zigzag stitch to prevent them from fraying, then fold the seam allowance to one side and top stitch to make it lay flat. Fold the vertical edge of the button plackets up 1/2 inch and iron in place. Sew the placket to the edge of the skirt, then fold under, iron, and pin into place. Then top stitch along both vertical edges. And repeat with the other placket. To attach the waistband, find the center and pin it to the center of the skirt with the right side of the waistband facing the wrong side of the skirt. Then pin the rest of the waistband to the skirt. Sew into place, making sure to stay inside the waistband's fold line. Turn the waistband inside out and sew along the edge where the placket meets the skirt. Trim the excess fabric, then turn inside out and repeat on the other side. Fold the waistband over to the right side of the skirt, pin into place, and top stitch all the way around the waistband from the part which attaches to the skirt, up the center seam, along the top of the waistband, down the opposite center seam, and back to the starting point. I used hammer-on snaps for my skirt, but you can use buttons or sew-on snaps if you prefer. First, mark where you want the snaps or buttons to go. I placed them 3/4 of an inch from the edge, with one on the waistband and the rest approximately 3 inches apart. And if you have downstairs neighbors, you may want to do this on a mat to absorb the sound because it involves a lot of hammering, which they might not appreciate. For the hem, I wanted to keep the raw edge, so I trimmed the uneven parts, then sewed a zigzag stitch around the bottom to prevent too much fraying. And that's it, we're done. Okay, so it turned out different than the inspiration photo, but sometimes these refashioning projects take on a life of their own depending on what you have to work with. But I'm happy with the result and I'll definitely wear it. And I hope it inspires you to try your own refashioning project. Thanks for watching and happy upcycling.